Little House on the Prairie wasn't just a show about family and frontier life. It was a battlefield of egos, hidden pain, and secrets that would stay buried for decades. Behind the wholesome smiles and prairie sunsets, nothing was as innocent as it seemed. These are 20 secrets hidden for decades about Little House on the Prairie. Number 20. The show was based on lies from the very beginning.
Can we go in now?
The Ingalls family story that millions fell in love with wasn't entirely true. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote her books decades after the events happened, and she changed almost everything. She made her father a saint when he was actually a restless wanderer who moved his family constantly, chasing failed dreams and leaving debts behind. She erased her younger brother, who died in infancy because it was too painful to include. She aged herself up in the books to make the stories more romantic and dramatic. The timeline was compressed, locations were switched, and entire years were simply deleted from the narrative. By the time Michael Landon got his hands on the material for television, he was adapting fiction that was already loosely based on reality. He added even more changes, creating storylines that never happened, inventing characters who never existed, and turning the prairie into a stage for morality, plays that had nothing to do with the Ingalls family's actual life. The truth was too messy, too sad, too real for television. So they built a beautiful lie and called it history. Number 19. Michael Landon controlled everything and everyone.
Well,
Michael Landon wasn't just the star. He was the writer, director, producer, and absolute dictator of Little House on the Prairie. He controlled every script, every casting decision, every camera angle. If he didn't like how a scene was going, he'd rewrite it on set, hand actors new lines minutes before filming, and expect them to perform perfectly. He directed over half the episodes himself, wrote dozens more, and his word was law. The network executives were terrified of him because the show made too much money to challenge his authority. Cast members learned quickly not to question his choices. Those who pushed back found their screen time cut or their characters written off entirely. Landon worked himself into exhaustion, sometimes sleeping only 3 hours a night, surviving on coffee and cigarettes, while juggling multiple roles simultaneously. He believed he knew better than everyone else, and the success of the show seemed to prove him right. But that control came at a cost. He created a toxic environment where people were afraid to speak up, where creativity was stifled unless it came from him, where the show became less about collaboration and more about one man's vision forced onto everyone else. Number 18. Melissa Gilbert and Melissa Sue. Anderson hated each other.
Well, what's that supposed to mean?
I don't know.
Then why'd you hit her?
On-screen, Laura and Mary Ingalls were sisters who loved each other despite their differences. Off-screen, Melissa Gilbert and Melissa Sue Anderson couldn't stand being in the same room. The tension started early and never went away. Gilbert was outgoing, loud, and craved attention. Anderson was reserved, serious, and protected her privacy fiercely. They clashed over everything, from screen time to dressing room assignments to who got better storylines. Gilbert felt Anderson was cold and stuck up. Anderson thought Gilbert was immature and desperate for approval. The animosity was so obvious that crew members would joke about keeping them separated between takes. They'd film their scenes together with professional efficiency, then immediately retreat to opposite sides of the set. Years later, when Gilbert wrote her autobiography, she dedicated an entire chapter to describing how difficult Anderson was to work with. Anderson responded by saying she had no interest in rekindling any relationship with her former co-star. The sisterly bond that millions of viewers believed in was pure acting, two professionals delivering performances while silently despising each other. It was one of Hollywood's best-kept secrets for decades. Number 17. The cast suffered through brutal filming conditions. The Prairie wasn't a soundstage. It was an actual location in Simi Valley, California, exposed to extreme weather with no protection. Summer temperatures regularly hit over 100 degrees, and the cast wore heavy period costumes made of wool and cotton that trapped heat against their skin. They'd film 12 to 14-hour days in that scorching sun, with minimal shade and limited water breaks, because Michael Landon wanted to maintain the shooting schedule. Winter episodes were just as bad, shot during California's coldest months when temperatures would drop into the 30s and 40s. The costumes offered little warmth, and actors would stand in freezing wind for hours waiting for the perfect shot. Melissa Gilbert later revealed she suffered from heat exhaustion multiple times, but was told to push through because stopping production was too expensive. The child actors had it worse, required by law to spend time with tutors between scenes, which meant they got even fewer breaks than the adults. Injuries were common: sprained ankles from running across uneven ground, cuts from working with period tools, infections from filming in dirt and mud without proper safety protocols. The show looked beautiful on screen, all golden sunlight and sweeping landscapes. But achieving that beauty meant punishing the people who brought it to life. Number 16. The real Ingalls family faced horrors. The show never showed. Laura Ingalls. Wilder's actual childhood was brutal in ways the television show completely sanitized. Her family lived in genuine poverty, not the television version where everyone was clean and well fed. They went hungry regularly, surviving on nothing but potatoes for weeks at a time. They dealt with devastating illness, watching neighbors die from diseases that ripped through frontier communities like wildfire. Laura witnessed her baby brother die in infancy, a trauma that haunted her entire life. Her sister Mary's blindness wasn't caused by scarlet fever like the show depicted. It was likely caused by viral meningoencephalitis, an inflammation of the brain that left her not just blind, but suffering from seizures and developmental issues the family could barely manage. The Ingalls family dealt with casual violence, discrimination, and the constant threat of starvation that television audiences would have found too disturbing to watch. P. Ingalls wasn't a gentle musician who solved problems with wisdom and kindness. He was a man who failed at almost every business venture he attempted, who dragged his family across the country, chasing dreams that never materialized, who left them in dangerous situations while he searched for work. Number 15. Michael Landon's personal life was a disaster hidden from fans.
By the way,
Yes.
arsenic paint is the paint that...
While playing the perfect father on television, Michael Landon's real family life was falling apart. He was married to his second wife, Lynn Noe, during most of Little House's run, but their relationship was toxic and volatile. He had affairs constantly, barely bothering to hide them from cast and crew. He met Cindy Clerico, a makeup artist on the show who was nearly 20 years younger, and began an affair that would eventually destroy his marriage. He'd bring Cindy to set, flaunting the relationship, while his wife and children suffered at home. Cast members were uncomfortable with the situation, but stayed silent because challenging Landon meant risking their careers. When he finally divorced Lynn to marry Cindy, the split was ugly in public. His older children felt betrayed and abandoned. Yet on screen, he continued playing Charles Ingalls, the devoted husband and father who always put his family first. The hypocrisy was staggering. He'd film emotional scenes about family loyalty and commitment, then leave set to spend time with his mistress. Viewers had no idea. They saw only the character, the man who represented everything decent and good about fatherhood. The reality was something much darker and more complicated. And number 14, Karen Grassel fought for equal pay and lost.
Time to practice. But my mother had been...
But kindness, forgiveness.
Karen Grassel played Caroline Ingalls with warmth and strength, anchoring the show with her portrayal of the ultimate Prairie mother. But behind the scenes, she was fighting a losing battle for fair compensation. While Michael Landon negotiated for ownership points and executive producer credits that would make him millions, Grassel was paid a standard actor's salary with no back-end participation. When she discovered the disparity, she demanded equal pay and a share of the profits. Landon refused. Their relationship deteriorated into open warfare. He'd humiliate her on set, criticizing her performances in front of cast and crew, rewriting scenes to diminish her character's importance. She fought back through her agents in the studio, but Landon had too much power. The network sided with him every time. Grassel was trapped, contractually obligated to continue working while being paid a fraction of what the show's male star earned. She later said those years were some of the most demoralizing of her career. She loved the character and the fans, but the experience taught her harsh lessons about how Hollywood treated women. Even playing the backbone of America's favorite family couldn't protect her from systematic inequality. Number 13. The show glorified a past that never existed. Little House on the Prairie sold America a fantasy of frontier life that had nothing to do with historical reality. The show portrayed settlers as noble pioneers bringing civilization to an empty wilderness. It ignored the fact that the land wasn't empty. Native Americans lived there for thousands of years before white settlers arrived and took it through violence and broken treaties. When the show did feature Native American characters, they were usually portrayed as either noble savages or dangerous threats, never as complex human beings fighting to protect their homes from invasion. The show romanticized poverty, making it look quaint and character building rather than devastating and deadly. It showed a community where everyone helped each other and problems were solved through hard work and moral lessons. The real frontier was a place where people cooled each other over land disputes, where racism and exploitation were casual and constant, where women had almost no rights and children were considered property. The show created a nostalgic vision of America that conservative viewers loved because it suggested simpler times when families were strong and communities were united. But those simpler times never existed. It was mythology dressed up as history, and millions of people believed it completely. In number 12, Victor French's alcoholism nearly destroyed the show.
Turn it down! Mark, will you calm down? What do you mean, calm down?
Victor French played Isaiah Edwards, the rough but lovable mountain man who became an Ingalls family favorite. Off camera, French was battling severe alcoholism that threatened his career and his life. He'd show up to set drunk or hungover, forgetting lines and missing marks. Michael Landon, who considered French one of his closest friends, covered for him repeatedly, rescheduling shoots and rewriting scenes to accommodate French's condition. But the problem kept getting worse. French would disappear for days, going on benders that left producers scrambling to adjust filming schedules. His marriage fell apart, his health deteriorated rapidly, that finally Landon confronted him directly, telling him he'd be fired if he didn't get sober. French entered rehab, got clean, and returned to the show. But the damage to his body was already done. Years of heavy drinking had destroyed his liver and weakened his heart. He could eventually die of lung cancer at age 54, his body ravaged by decades of addiction. During Little House's original run, fans had no idea their beloved Mr. Edwards was falling apart between episodes, held together only by Landon's loyalty and Hollywood's ability to hide uncomfortable truths. Number 11. Child actors were exploited under California law.
You fetch some water for the dishes.
Yes, Pa. I told Nellie.
The child actors on Little House on the Prairie worked under California labor laws designed to protect them, but those protections were barely enforced. Melissa Gilbert, Melissa Sue Anderson, and the other young cast members were required to spend 3 hours daily with on-set teachers, but production found ways around this constantly. They'd schedule tutoring during lunch breaks, or at the end of exhausting filming days when kids were too tired to learn anything. The children worked the same brutal hours as adults, just with more legal paperwork documenting their time. A portion of their earnings was supposed to be protected in Coogan accounts, savings set aside that parents couldn't touch. But many parents found loopholes or simply stole the money, leaving their children with nothing despite years of work. Melissa Gilbert later revealed her mother and stepfather spent most of her Little House earnings before she turned 18, forcing her to declare bankruptcy as an adult. The kids were treated as commodities, their childhood sacrificed for a show that would make other people wealthy. They missed school activities, birthday parties, and normal friendships. They grew up on camera, every awkward phase documented and broadcast, never getting the privacy that childhood should provide. California called it protection. The kids called it something else entirely. Number 10. The show's religious messaging was propaganda disguised as entertainment. Little House on the Prairie wasn't subtle about its religious agenda. Michael Landon was a secular Jew who converted the show into a vehicle for Christian messaging that grew more aggressive each season. Early episodes featured occasional church scenes and prayers before meals, standard for period accuracy. But as Landon gained more control, the preaching intensified. Entire episodes became Sunday school lessons, thinly disguised as drama, with characters delivering sermons directly to camera about faith, forgiveness, and God's plan. Landon inserted himself as writer and director of these religious episodes, crafting stories where atheist characters were punished, where doubt was portrayed as moral weakness, where every problem was solved through prayer and biblical wisdom. Critics noticed but stayed quiet because religious viewers loved it, and their support translated to massive ratings. The show became appointment viewing for Christian families who saw it as wholesome entertainment in an increasingly secular television landscape. But former cast members later admitted the constant religious content made them uncomfortable. It wasn't about historical accuracy or character development. It was Landon using his power to broadcast his personal beliefs to millions of viewers every week, turning a family drama into a propaganda machine that never acknowledged its true purpose. Number 9. Melissa Gilbert's eating disorder started on set.
That's not true.
It is true, and it won't work.
Melissa Gilbert was 9 years old when Little House on the Prairie began, a normal child with a normal body. By her teenage years, she'd developed a severe eating disorder that would plague her for decades. The pressure started small. Costume designers commented that her dresses fit differently. Producers suggested she watch what she ate. Michael Landon, who controlled everything, making casual remarks about her weight during fittings. Television cameras added 10 pounds to everyone's appearance, and Gilbert became obsessed with staying thin enough to look normal on screen. She started skipping meals, then purging, then exercising compulsively between takes. Her body was going through puberty on national television. Every change scrutinized by millions of viewers and dozens of crew members. She felt violated and powerless, unable to control anything except what she ate. The eating disorder became her secret rebellion, the one thing nobody could take from her. It nearly cold her multiple times. She'd pass out from hunger, her hair would fall out, her periods stopped for months. But she kept it hidden because admitting weakness meant risking her career. The wholesome Laura Ingalls viewers loved was starving herself to maintain an image that existed only on camera, destroying her body to play a character who was supposed to represent health and vitality. Number 8. The show's racist episodes were quietly buried. Little House on the Prairie had a racism problem that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Several episodes featured storylines that were overtly bigoted, portraying Native Americans as savages, depicting Asian characters with offensive stereotypes, and treating black characters as props rather than people. One episode showed Charles Ingalls in blackface, performing minstrelsy that was supposed to be funny, but was actually horrifying. Another featured a Chinese railroad worker, portrayed with an exaggerated accent and subservient behavior that reinforced every ugly stereotype. When these episodes aired in the 1970s, some critics objected, but the show was too popular for anyone to care. Decades later, as America slowly began reckoning with its racist past, these episodes became embarrassing relics. Networks that ran Little House in syndication started quietly pulling them from rotation, hoping nobody would notice. Streaming services buried them deep in their catalogs or removed them entirely. The show's defenders argue these episodes reflected the time period being depicted, that frontier America was racist and the show was just being historically accurate. But that argument ignores the fact that Little House romanticized that era, presenting it as a golden age worth celebrating. The show could have confronted racism honestly, used its platform to educate viewers about injustice. Instead, it perpetuated harm and then tried to pretend those episodes never existed. Number 7. Michael Landon's chain. Smoking cold him, and everyone knew it.
Is used in the green rooms. That isn't how I got sick.
Wood, Michael Landon smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. Everyone on set knew. He'd light one cigarette from the butt of another, chain smoking through rehearsals, between takes, during script meetings, constantly. The smell of smoke followed him everywhere, embedded in his clothes and his hair. Cast members would beg him to quit, warning him he was culling himself. He'd laugh it off, make a joke about dying young, and light another cigarette. His fingers were stained yellow. His voice grew raspier each season. He developed a chronic cough that he refused to have checked. In 1991, at age 54, Michael Landon was diagnosed with pancreatic and liver cancer. Doctors told him the disease was aggressive and terminal. He had maybe months to live. He went public with the diagnosis, giving interviews where he remained optimistic and brave, the same character he'd played on television for decades. But privately, he was terrified and full of regrets. The smoking had caught up with him, just like everyone said it would. He died 3 months after the diagnosis, his body destroyed by a disease that cigarettes had likely caused. The man who'd played America's father for 9 seasons, who'd survived every frontier hardship imaginable on screen, was killed by his own addiction. Easy number 6, the final season, was a desperate ratings grab. That failed by season 9, Little House on the Prairie was exhausted. The ratings were declining, the cast was tired, and Michael Landon wanted out. He'd carried the show for nearly a decade and was ready to move on, so he made the baffling decision to leave the series while it was still in production. Charles and Caroline Ingalls sold the farm and moved away, abandoning Walnut Grove for reasons that made no narrative sense. The show continued without them, retitled Little House, A New Beginning, focusing on Laura and Almanzo's life as adults raising their daughter. It was a disaster. Viewers felt betrayed. The heart of the show had always been the Ingalls family unit, and without Charles and Caroline, nothing worked. New characters were introduced desperately, trying to fill the void, but audiences rejected them. The writing became repetitive and preachy. The magic was gone, replaced by a hollow imitation that satisfied nobody. Ratings plummeted. After one painful season, the show was mercifully canceled. But even cancellation wasn't the end. Landon returned to write and direct a television movie finale called The Last Farewell, where the townspeople of Walnut Grove literally blew up their entire town rather than let a railroad tycoon take it. It was an insane ending. Explosions and destruction that felt like Landon burning down everything he'd built out of spite. Number 5. Melissa Sue Anderson was nearly cold by dangerous stunts.
For Little House, did you specifically audition to play Mary Ingalls?
Well,
Playing Mary Ingalls meant Melissa Sue Anderson spent several seasons pretending to be blind, a challenging acting task that required her to navigate sets without looking where she was going. Production took minimal safety precautions. She'd be told to walk across rooms filled with furniture, downstairs, near open flames, all while keeping her eyes unfocused and trusting that nobody would let her get hurt. Multiple times, she nearly was. During one episode, she was supposed to walk near a fireplace while cameras captured her, struggling with her disability. The scene required multiple takes, and with each one, she got closer to the flames. On the final take, her dress caught fire. Crew members rushed forward, smothering the flames before she was seriously burned, but Anderson was traumatized. Another time, she was filming a scene where Mary walked alone through the woods. The ground was uneven and covered with roots and rocks. Anderson tripped and fell hard, spraining her wrist and bruising her face. Production shut down for 3 days while she recovered. She later said playing a blind character was the most physically demanding work she'd ever done, requiring constant concentration while surrounded by hazards. The show never brought in a disability consultant or advocate. They just expected a teenage girl to fake blindness convincingly while risking injury for the sake of drama. Number 4. The real Laura Ingalls. Wilder had a severely disabled son. Nobody knows about.
You fetch some water for the dishes.
yes, Pa. I told Nellie.
Laura Ingalls. Wilder's books and the television show portrayed her marriage to Almanzo as resulting in one daughter, Rose. But the truth was more complicated and tragic. Laura and Almanzo had a son who died in infancy, an unnamed baby boy who lived only 12 days before succumbing to illness. The grief devastated both parents, but even before that loss, Laura had given birth to another son, whose story has been largely erased from history. Some historians believe this child survived, but was severely disabled, possibly with developmental issues or physical handicaps that 19th century medicine couldn't address. Laura and Almanzo may have placed him in an institution, a common practice for that era when families couldn't care for disabled children. The evidence is circumstantial but compelling. Financial records show unexplained expenses. Family letters contain cryptic references to a child nobody will name directly. Laura's daughter Rose, who helped edit her mother's books, may have deliberately removed all references to this son to protect the family's reputation and preserve the wholesome image that would later become a television empire. If this child existed, he lived and died in obscurity, erased from the narrative because his existence complicated the pioneer family mythology. The truth was buried so successfully that most Little House fans have no idea there might have been another wilder child whose story was deemed too difficult to tell. Number 3, the cast. Knew the show was lying but stayed silent for decades. Everyone involved with Little House on the Prairie knew they were selling a false version of American history. Either the writers knew, the actors knew, the producers and network executives knew. They understood the real frontier was brutal, racist, and deadly. They knew the Ingalls family's actual story was much darker than what appeared on screen, but nobody said anything publicly because the show was too successful and too beloved to criticize. Cast members would do interviews promoting the series, talking about family values and wholesome entertainment, never mentioning the exploitation happening behind the scenes, or the historical lies being broadcast to millions. It wasn't until decades later, after the show ended and enough time had passed, that people started telling the truth. Melissa Gilbert wrote her autobiography, exposing the toxicity and abuse. Karen Grassel gave interviews about the pay inequality and Michael Landon's controlling behavior. Other cast members slowly came forward with their own stories of what really happened on that prairie. But by then, the damage was done. An entire generation had grown up believing Little House on the Prairie represented real American history, wholesome values, and simpler times. The lies had become cultural mythology, impossible to dislodge even when confronted with facts. The cast had stayed silent when their voices might have mattered, and their silence helped build a fantasy that millions still believe today. Number 2, Michael Landon stole writing credits from others.
Man,
Feel that you're comfortable enough.
I am comfortable.
Right.
Didn't do a hell of a lot of good to call the press conference, though.
Michael Landon's name appeared as writer or director on over half of Little House on the Prairie's episodes, an impressive creative output that helped build his legend as a television auteur. But multiple writers who worked on the show later claimed Landon stole their work, taking scripts they'd written and putting his own name on them to claim residuals and maintain control. The Writers Guild received complaints multiple times, but Landon's power protected him from serious investigation. He'd bring writers into meetings, listen to their ideas and pitches, then dismiss them, and later produce episodes based on those exact concepts with his name as sole writer. He'd take completed scripts, change a few lines, and claimed co-writing credit that entitled him to half the payment. Writers were furious but powerless. Complaining meant being blacklisted not just from Little House, but from other Landon projects, and potentially the industry entirely. Some writers quit rather than continue being exploited. Others stayed and swallowed their anger, watching their words performed by actors while someone else received credit and compensation. It was creative theft on a massive scale, enabled by an industry that protected stars over staff. Landon's reputation as a writer was built partially on other people's talent, stolen and repackaged under his famous name. And because he's dead and can't defend himself, the full truth of how much he actually wrote versus how much he stole may never be completely known. Number 1, the show's wholesome image destroyed real lives. Little House on the Prairie sold itself as wholesome family entertainment, safe to viewing for children that promoted good values. But that image destroyed the people who built it. Child actors grew up damaged by exploitation and pressure, developing eating disorders, addiction issues, and psychological trauma that haunted them into adulthood. Adult cast members suffered under a controlling director who punished dissent and created a toxic workplace. Marriages fell apart under the stress of production. Mental health issues went untreated because admitting vulnerability meant showing weakness. The show's insistence on maintaining its wholesome reputation meant hiding every ugly truth, burying every scandal, pretending everything was perfect when nothing was. Viewers at home saw happy families solving problems with love and wisdom. They had no idea the people creating that fantasy were suffering in silence, sacrificing their well-being to maintain an illusion. The show became a trap. It made careers but destroyed lives. It brought joy to millions while causing pain to dozens. And the worst part is how completely the deception worked. Even today, decades after the show ended, and many fans refuse to believe the truth about what happened behind the scenes. They've invested too much emotional energy in the fantasy to accept reality. Little House on the Prairie promised wholesome entertainment and delivered something much darker. It was a lie so successful that confronting the truth feels like destroying childhood itself. Little House on the Prairie built an empire on nostalgia and lies, selling America a past that never existed while hiding the present that was too ugly to show. Because sometimes the most wholesome stories hide the darkest truths, and the Prairie was never as innocent as it looked.